Hey everybody, it's Prospector Jess here from sourdoughminer.com. Checking in tonight. We got another Where Can I Find Gold in Pennsylvania. So we're going to look at Pennsylvania tonight to look at the gold maps again. It's time to pick one of those up and do it. I said we'd do them every once in a while now, kind of spread them out a little more. We've been talking about various other things, the systematic process of finding gold, and we talked a little bit about other things that had to do with gold, bedrock in particular. Now we're going to go back and look at the maps and find out how to get started locating gold using government gold maps. And speaking of which, take a look down below. There's a link, sourdoughminer.com/ggm, and you'll find a report there that describes, how to go through the process of creating these custom maps and what I've been doing to create all these pictures. You'll want to do that because you really want to zoom in on the place you really are looking at, and I can't do that for everybody. There's just not enough time in the day, not enough time in the year. So, given that, we're going to do Pennsylvania tonight. Should be interesting. If you recall, we started off in the lower southeast down in Georgia, and we're swinging our way up through this band of gold that moves up through the Appalachians and pops out into Pennsylvania here. And then, according to records, there's not much there in New Jersey, 0 records. That doesn't mean it's not there. It means there's no records. Again, remember, New York had this problem about what kind of records they keep and what their laws are, and they all stem from the idea that the king owns all the gold. We're talking 1600s. And so a lot of those laws in these 13 colonies sort of stuck. And to this day, they affect the availability of information with regard to mines. A lot of them didn't have much in the way of mining anyway, but and that's true of New Jersey and so forth. But Pennsylvania, on the other hand, we're going to take an adventure into the southeast corner of Pennsylvania and take a look at what there is to offer, because there are a few mines. And it might be interesting to just probe into what's available there. So let's take a look. First, let's make sure everybody's hearing me okay. My audio check over on the other end here looks good. I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. I posted a little note about Fenn's. If you're familiar with Forest Fenn's treasure hunt that's been going on for a long time, there was a post about it being found, so I posted something. You'll take a look on the page. Do that after the show, okay? So right now we have 17 people and 5 comments. Let's take a look. Charles is on. Good evening, Charles. Good to see you again. And Bob Sheasley's there from North Carolina. Brad Stevens from Texas. He's in the room. And Joshua Saunders is there. Hi. And Justin Saunders, excuse me, not Joshua. My eyes need fixing. Yes, we know that. And Charles says sound is good. So awesome. And Merle's there from New York State still claims all gold mined in the state. This is true, although if you look carefully, the roots of that is an old 1600s era law and some history, so it's not real clear exactly how they go about enforcing that. And several people after last meeting when we did New York State, which you'll find in the post below somewhere, just hunt through Hunting for Gold page on Facebook, FORGOLD, or go onto YouTube for Prospector Jess and subscribe. You'll find that when I talked about New York State afterwards, we had several people chime in that yes, they may have this law, but they have actually gone out there with state troopers asking them what they're finding and is it fun. So apparently isn't, it's one of these possibly grandfathered old laws. Then one law that I know for sure would exist, and that is the right to private property and claim access if there is a private claim. Those will be enforced. That's a kind of federal level issue, property rights, so be careful. But if you're out there in a public park and you're panning and you're not annoying people, I doubt anybody's going to bother you. But, I might be wrong. They'll take your pan away. So what? It'll be fun trying. Like I said, in that, you go look at that video, it talks all about where. We won't go into that here. So Pennsylvania. So let's take a look at this corner of Pennsylvania. Make sure everybody's getting comfortable. Yes, we are good. Awesome. Okay, so somebody asked about Adams County. I don't know whether I can cover what we're going to be doing. Here's Lancaster County, Allentown. So I'm familiar with this area because I used to go and do a conference in Philadelphia on automated test equipment. It used to be in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and then they moved it to Philadelphia and then Washington, D.C., and then I don't know where it is these days, but that was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The reason it was in Allentown is that was the home of AT&T at the time, so Allentown and Cherry Hill, New Jersey kind of shared interest in it. And so being that, these were areas that I used to kind of haunt looking for things to do when the show wasn't going on. We would go out, wife and I would go out and look at some of these farms out here. There's a lot of really interesting stuff with the Amish and old farming communities. Pretty interesting place. But notice we have some mines already popping up here. Let's take a look. This one's called the Grace Mine. And it says magnetite, pyrite, chalcopyrite, covalite, and digenite. Digonite. I can't. My eyes just can't do that. I got the lights in my eyes and the thing, and it just there. So anyway, it's a skarn, cobalt, iron, and then secondary. So primary is cobalt and iron. Secondary is gold, copper, sulfur, pyrite. So again, we get back into these sulfides and the sulfur ores, which are pretty prevalent along this whole band. We've been talking about it since we were down in Georgia, and we keep on talking about it all the way up through the top end of this thing. And in fact, there's some more of it going up north into Maine even. We talked about that. So this is pretty interesting. Looks like a lode mine. Unknown, they say, past producer magnetite, so mostly iron, copper, cobalt, and gold. Let's poke into this one just for fun. We go into our deck and look at what it has for a record. And the record it pulls up is magnetite and crib, blah blah blah. Doesn't give a record date or anything like that. So basically we don't know, some probably county records. So we don't have a good picture of where that was, or when that was found, and that kind of stuff. We know where, but we don't know when. Here's one down on John H. Bleacher Farm Prospect. This one is an unknown. Nickel is the primary, and gold and abrasives are the tertiary. Abrasive gold? Now, that'd be interesting. Makes some pretty rough jewelry. So, let's see. Eastern Field Operations, Field Manual, April 194. Looks like it's 1940s time frame, which makes sense. A lot of this stuff was mapped out in the 40s as part of the effort. We talked about that earlier, the effort to come up with minerals, mainly copper and iron, for the war effort. And so they went back into a lot of these old mines and found out what they had in them. Here's another one, Lancaster County. That's where that's your see, we got chalcopyrite, galena, which is a lead ore, limonite, which is iron, and it has iridium, lead, copper, platinum, gold, and silver. So you see here we're getting into the platinum group elements, PGEs, as well as gold and silver as a primary commodity in this. Pretty cool find. Now it's declared as an occurrence, which means it's probably trace kind of levels. Let's see what it says in terms of the dates, if anything. USGS Survey, Bulletin 193, page 59, 1902. So that was pre-World War II. So this one is an interesting find and has some old history. Now, again, we're getting back into, a lot of these have the appearance of, because it's chalcopyrite and galena, it's these ores. That tends to tell me that what we're finding are not lode deposit or placer deposits, but lode deposits. We're finding secondary hydrothermal injections of minerals and sulfides of those metals that go into the deposit. And so that gives you an idea of what you would find there. It's kind of fascinating because it's very much like what we see in a lot of these. Here's Cornwall Mine. Past producer, magnetite. Here we go. Iron, copper, silver, gold, cobalt. So same pattern. Unnamed occurrence. So it needs a name. You can give it one. Let's take a vote. Who wants to name this occurrence? It needs a name. Just put the name in the comment below, and we'll talk to USGS and tell them, you know, this has a name. We gave it to it. So here we go. Primary commodity: copper, platinum, palladium, nickel, thorium, gold, and tellurium. So here we go. That was a question that was asked last night. Was how would I know whether there are any rare earths that go with some of these things? Well, tellurium, there's your telltale. So when you start seeing tellurium, start looking for a whole host of other rare earths, many of which wouldn't be remarked on this because they weren't really that interesting. But when you get in there and find tellurium along with the other mix of gold and silver and whatnot, then it starts looking kind of interesting in that. Let's see what kind of dates we see on this. Lots of information here. 1989, USGS research on mineral resources. So here we go. Now, so the USGS went back in and looked at some of the material, looked at some of the records, and found some valuable rare earth and other platinum, etc., iridium, palladium would be a good one, and decided this one was worthy of note. Because at some point we're going to run out of a lot of that stuff, especially when we go to our new green economy, which is going to burn up minerals like crazy, and we'll have to have them coming from places like this that are currently inactive. That's what all these crosshatch essentially say. It's an occurrence, but they don't say it's an open mine. It's not active. Doesn't mean it isn't. It just kind of probably isn't. So this one's pyrite with palladium, gold, lead, and platinum. Here we go again. So we're seeing a pattern here. A lot of platinum group elements, some rare earths, and so forth. Kind of interesting. All of this pretty much in this lower corner of Pennsylvania, down in this area here, you know, across from Wilmington, Delaware, and up from Baltimore. We talked about Baltimore a while back when we were doing Maryland. Now, we also talked about New York, and that there was some funny prospects down in this area just south of Poughkeepsie. And so when you think about it, all this kind of points to, see these bands again, we go back to this geologic history, see these mountain ranges that are peeled back. They're hills by Western standards, they're mountains by East Coast standards, but the fact is they're still there and lumpy and they still produce gold. Those would tend to indicate that there may be some placer deposits that aren't marked out in here. But the places where I would look, again, downhill, downstream from where these lodes are marked, and probably any area in the immediate region that follows one of these geologic bands, you'd have to dig in deeper. We talked about bedrock yesterday. You'd have to dig in and look at a geologic map and see if the bedrocks for these regions tend to match the same composition as the bedrocks where these lodes were pulled out, and where you might want to go look for placer deposits. Remember, the placer though can be coming in an area that is not necessarily the same bedrock as your lode, but it's going to be downhill, downstream from flooding that happened where the lode is. That's for sure. So just keep that in mind as you're going through this whole prospect of where would I look? Well, I'd look, you know, in these areas, and I'd go down and look at one of these zones. Let's just zoom in on this one, for example. And right off the bat, I see rivers. I see an unnamed occurrence here. It's out in the middle of somebody's farm field. Who knows whether that's really where it is? We've talked about this before. It could be so many paces from this old oak tree or whatever. There doesn't appear to be any obvious tailings piles, but that doesn't mean there weren't any, 400 years ago. And so it's kind of of interest that it's up here, and that there is a river flowing through here. And if we took a topo map, which I don't think I can do, maybe I'll do one of those another time, but you can flip a topo map in place of this and leave the gold, the mines in place, and that gives you a real good idea, because you're going to basically go cross the topo lines at 90 degrees. That's the steepest descent. Gold is going to roll or flow or get pushed down the steepest descent slope it can in general. And the reason is very simple. mass and gravity. And so gravity will push it downhill, and it's going to roll just like it would on a ramp or anything else. If that ramp points in a certain direction, you're going to find that whatever you put on here is going to want to roll in that same direction because gravity's pushing it, accelerating it. And so the same thing holds true for gold, even though it may stick from point to point. Every flood season, every 1,000 years or so, is going to push it a little further along. The place it will likely go in this area is down toward this, because this river is kind of a low point for all of the flows, even in the flood season or otherwise. So this thing is going to find its way down like one of these ravines. See this gulch here? And so it's going to go down this gulch and head right toward this river right here, or what used to be the river but now has been replaced by a parking lot. But chances are good that it's been reclaimed. It could be that it goes on down through here, but that's one of those things that once they start mucking with the topography, topographically they level it and backfill with material to reclaim some of this old river area. You see it says marsh. So this is a boggy region where it's fairly level, and therefore you'll lose track of where the gold would go, but chances are pretty good that it's going to go down one of these gulches somehow, or right through this neighborhood, which has also been messed up, and down in through here, and run into a golf course. Who knows? But that's the adventure. We're kind of poking at where it might go, and whether you might find anything. Hard to say, but I do imagine that if you manage to get into one of these and there was a public park with some sands and gravels in it, or natural beach material, not carted in from someplace else, you might have a pretty good chance of finding it, or down through one of these gulches. See how this one's kind of dammed off and formed a little reservoir? That's probably to keep it from flooding downhill here somewhere. But the existing, kind of gulch still goes down through here. You can see it by the shading. If we turn on the night vision and we bring up kind of daylight, it doesn't work so good on the East Coast. Works great on the West Coast where the slopes are steeper, but you can see a little bit here. See how these are kind of ridges? And this is, I don't know, this looks leveled out. So chances are something flowed through here or through here, and now it's all leveled out and kind of messed with when they did the freeway and all of this stuff. So it's going to be a little hard to trace what's going on there. But you might even, as far as down along these shores, you might find some interesting material on this part of the riverbed, or down deep in the river. A little hard to say, but there's clearly, this case, there is an instance of a platinum group element occurrence, and that's kind of it for Pennsylvania. That makes sense. Let me zoom out to where we can see the whole thing. Again, not much going on, over toward Lake Erie or any of this stuff. We've talked about that it doesn't mean in this area that there isn't gold over there. It means primarily it's flour, really fine flour gold coming from glaciers. And so you're going to kick into a whole different mode of recovery and look for fine gold, gravel pits, and any kind of glacial scarring. Any glacial till that might have been left behind, lumps of where the glaciers left behind, piles of gravel and boulders. They'll be rounded, they won't be chunky. If you find chunky stuff, it means somebody else brought the stuff in, broke it up, and made roadbed material. But if it's nice rounded pebbles or large cobbles or big boulders, now we're talking some interesting stuff. You don't want it to look like this, where it's all angular and broken up. You want it to look instead more like this, where it's nice and rounded and has this one's kind of dark, but it's nice and rounded, and you can see how it has this kind of, polished edge and texture to it. So that's the difference between what you're looking for. So make sure you find the rounded stuff, because that's where the gold will go to bedrock underneath that and hide out, even in a glacier. So, so that's it for tonight. Time out. Has anyone ever found gold in Wisconsin? Go find the Gold in Wisconsin posts, like I said, either here or on YouTube, Prospector Jess channel, and subscribe there. but you'll find it over there. I did a Wisconsin thing, and yes, they have found gold in Wisconsin. It has a lot of these same properties, with one unusual exception, and that is it and Minnesota have some, and Michigan have some very interesting iron and metallic deposits that carry gold and other really valuable minerals with them, along in a band that comes out of in between the two lakes. And so you'll want to pay attention to that. Other than that, it's going to be flour gold, just like here, glaciers. That's the big story there. We're going to detour into Oklahoma soon enough. It's on the list, and Ohio, same kind of deal. The thing about those two areas, I'll be honest with you up front, the records are pretty sparse. So what we're going to be talking about is kind of like what's going on around it that might give us a hint as to what we can find there and what we'll use to recover gold, discover and recover gold. Very similar properties to what we're seeing in the northwestern Pennsylvania zone, where we have lots of glaciation. Down there we have lots of river flow and depositing of massive amounts of material. And there's probably gold way down deep, and I've heard from several of you already that in some of the areas I talked about earlier, where like in Oklahoma and Texas, where they're drilling oil, some of them are drilling up gold. You know, it's kind of like, oh, stop, wait, you know, and no, we got black gold. It's worth more, which it is, because the recovery mechanism is pretty hard to get that stuff out. You know, you'd have to drill lots of holes, and that gets real expensive. You know, $1 million an hour is a lot of money. So on that vein, we talked in Maine earlier. Up above or down below on the page, you'll see, and there are places in Maine you'll have to look. A lot of it's along the Atlantic coast for special geologic conditions that I went over. So that's it for tonight, guys. Good prospecting, and we'll catch you tomorrow night. See you then. Good prospecting.